Hello lovely people, my name is Emma and I don't really know what I'm going to call this video. Today I wanted to do kind of like an overly specific book recommendations for books that are political in nature, specifically looking at women's lot in the world and kind of feminism in general. So like almost like feminist fiction. Think kind of like The Handmaid's Tale, which I'm not recommending in here just because everybody and their mother's heard about this book, but just kind of generally books that focus where women and women's plight are at the heart of the story. So I hope that that makes sense. And yeah, I think I've got either 4 or 5 books to talk about today, and we're going to jump in and do this. One that I read quite a while ago now that was hugely popular on BookTube and is really kind of the iconic book to move on to next after reading The Handmaid's Tale is The Power by Naomi Alderman. This is a story about a world where women develop the ability to shock people, kind of like an electric eel, and it's something which kind of the younger women end up sort of evolving and developing, and then they can unlock it in the older generation. And it's about the sudden flipping of the power dynamic within sort of the whole world and sort of patriarchal society, where suddenly women have a very violent and physical ability to hurt men, and what does that do to society in general. It's following, I think it's either 4 or 5 very specific women characters and sort of their different ways that they're interacting with this, and it's kind of a little microcosm. Everything is sort of sped up, everything is definitely a little bit more escalatory than necessarily would happen in our real world, but it's a really fascinating and incredibly visceral, powerful read that I think is not afraid to go places that I wasn't necessarily expecting it to go, and it gets very dark in very different ways. It's also really interestingly bookended with this kind of meta-analysis where this is similar to The Handmaid's Tale, where there's a sort of idea of a story within a story, which I think is doing some very clever things. I don't want to say too much more than that because I don't want to ruin it, but I know that this is like definitely heavily influenced by The Handmaid's Tale, because Margaret Atwood was actually like a workshop person with Naomi Alderman. There was like a mentor-mentee thing that they did, where this book was the product of that. It's a Women's Prize fiction winner. I can totally see why. I think I'd like devoured this book in one sitting. It was such an intense read, and I think it's going to be divisive, but I think it's really cool. Like, does that make sense? One that's riffing off of slightly a similar idea, and you can really tell that they were going for a similar vibe with the cover, but I don't think was quite as successful, but still was an interesting read, is Vox by Christina Dalcher. This is set in America, where women are silenced, and basically they wear these devices where I think they can only say 100 words a day, and after that point they then start to get shocked by this, and if they continue, it can basically kill them. And it's a look at how has this happened within this society, and this woman scientist whose job has really kind of been stripped away from her and her identity has been stripped away from her. How can she join a resistance to be able to try and fight back against this? The work that she's doing, how does that connect with this? And sort of her home life with her husband and her children, like her teenage son and her young daughter. How does this new limitation on like her actual words and literally physically silencing somebody, what does that do to them? I'm not 100% certain in terms of like how it ended. I thought it was a little bit strange, and like with so many of these books, the original idea is normally better than the execution. It's very hard to wrap up a dystopian kind of thing, isn't it? You just sort of have to let it occur. And I love the fact in this book, like, America's doing it and the rest of the world is just looking over being like, America's having a bad time right now, which don't we always do that to America? So I don't know how much I bought that particular side of it, but it was a really interesting thought experiment extended out, and I do think that it was raising some really interesting points, and it is definitely kind of connected with something like The Power. It's a really sort of extremist view of what could potentially happen. So very, very interesting read. One that I read really recently that I definitely super enjoyed is Herland by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. This is like an old school feminist text from the early 1900s, and it's about 3 American explorers who stumble across a sort of tribe within the Amazon who are entirely women who have managed to evolve to not need men for reproduction, and it's about the society that gets created if women are left alone for 2,000 years. It is fascinating when reading these kinds of books to see what feminist thought was doing at the time, especially in sort of the early 1900s, sort of ideals about what people thought a like utopia just run by women would actually do. And these three explorers who are men, kind of each one of the characters sort of, it occupies a different role within the sort of dichotomy between one of them who's super misogynistic and really views women as objects, one who sort of idolizes them, and then sort of our main narrator who's in the middle, who is trying to kind of cast a balance between them. So it's a fun way of looking at how men might interact within this world. I don't think it's hugely realistic, because I think we've definitely come quite a long way since then, about what we think about gender roles and what we think about feminism in general and what we're kind of striving for. But I do think it's just generally a fascinating read, and I really deeply enjoyed it, so I totally recommend it. One that's also worth kind of thinking about, that often gets mentioned in these kind of lists, is Women on the Edge of Time, or Women Out of Time by Margaret Piercy or something. I'll put it in the comments down below. It's another kind of like utopian one. I read it a while ago, but I DNF'd it because it was just really weird and a bit trippy, and I couldn't get along with it. But it's one that might be worth kind of looking into, because it definitely could belong on this list. I just had a bad time with it. Now, veering slightly off from like the dystopian world into more individual women, we have An Untamed State by Roxanne Gay. This, I mean, on the front it's described as breathless, artful, disturbing and original, and I will definitely give it that. Roxanne Gay is definitely an iconic feminist writer of our day and age, and this one is about a woman who gets kidnapped and held for ransom, and then because of that violently raped and sexually assaulted whilst waiting for her family to pay her ransom while she's living in Haiti. It's the kind of book that does not shy away from staring violence straight down, and is absolutely horrific to read in many ways. And I don't think I actually enjoyed it as a reading experience, but if, like, huge trigger warnings for like everything ever, but it was incredibly powerful, so I will give it that. And I think it is the kind of book that I'm actually like, I would never want to reread it, but I'm pleased I have read it, and I definitely find myself coming back to it and thinking about it over and over and over again. And in terms of highlighting the plight of women, like, oh damn, does this go into the concept of rape culture into really graphic detail. So maybe one to check out, depending on what kind of a reader you are and how able you are to be removed from the content of the book, if that makes sense, like emotionally speaking. Way to review that one. And then the final one I want to talk about is Red Clocks by Leni Zumas. This is about a world where America has gone really hardcore with its kind of pro-life movement, and abortion is completely illegal, but so is also in vitro fertilization, because they believe that life starts at conception, and so any of the eggs that would die in the petri dish are not okay. And it's following 5 different women and kind of their interactions with the concept of motherhood and pregnancy within this world. And in terms of like specifically for more of like a feminist-y kind of movement, it's really interesting. One of the characters, a young girl, like a teenager who ends up pregnant, and then she tries to travel to Canada to get an abortion, and it discusses the pink wall that gets put up where Canada promises to send people back, and the idea that you could go to jail for murder, the risks that she takes to try and get a back alley abortion basically. All of the stories are really interesting, but in terms of sort of as a powerful discussion about women's bodies and choice and the importance of pro-choice over pro-life, I'm most definitely pro-choice. It's a very powerful story there. Generally, overall, I really liked the story in general. I thought it was a really powerful, moving, beautiful collection of stories. Sort of, they all interconnect and interweave, and it's lovely. But that particular thread through of the 5 characters is definitely one that really struck a chord for me. So there you have it. These are 5 fiction books that are political/feminist in nature. That are just generally interesting and good. Do let me know if you've read any of these down below. I do have a couple more on my TBR list that I haven't got to yet, but if you have any other recommendations, do leave them in the comments down below. It's definitely a style of fiction that I really enjoy. So do, yeah, any recs you've got for me. Have a wonderful reading week, and I'll chat to you soon. Bye!